I declare the briefing forum of the 23rd of May 2023 held in Council Chambers at 241 Rockaby Road, Subiaco, open at 5:30 p.m. Welcome everyone. On behalf of the City of Subiaco, I acknowledge the Whadjuk Noongar people as the traditional custodians of the area. We recognise their cultural connection to the land and waterways of Subiaco. Please note that this briefing is being live streamed and recorded. We've had no apologies this evening, although I note that Councillor Burns is due to be attending by Zoom but hasn't yet logged on, and I'm not sure where Councillor De Vries is.
She allowed me to say she did tell me that she was coming from a way away and she's in traffic, I think, so, but she's intending to be here. She's asked me to pass on. Thanks.
Okay, we'll just call her MIA for now. We've got the entire executive leadership team here and a number of staff to assist as well. Anyone applying for leave of absence this evening? Nope. Disclosure of interest. Any disclosures? Councillor Hammersley.
Thank you. I, Angela Hammersley, wish to declare interest in agenda item 7.1. Or is it 7.2? Wait a minute.
It's 7th Street Precinct.
Yep, 7.1. The type of interest I wish to declare is impartiality, pursuant to clause 22.2 of the Code of Conduct for Council members, committee members and candidates. And the nature of my interest is I own a residential property at 24 Catherine Street, Subiaco. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other disclosures? Okay, there's no approved deputations, and I won't make any. Actually, I will. I'll make an announcement this evening. Take a look around, councillors, because this is, I'm reliably informed, the last agenda briefing in these chambers. Next week will be the last ordinary council meeting in these chambers, so unless you guys get together and call a special council meeting for something, that'll be the last council meeting in the current chambers, and then we're going to be well and truly settled in Hay Street. So it's pretty historic in a special kind of way. Okay, let's get into the officer reports. C1, Draft Amended Local Planning Policy 7.2. Councillor Powell.
Yes, thank you. Through you, Mayor. Look, it's just a point of clarification. Formerly, neighbours could sign plans if they supported development. It appears that under this new proposal, that in fact they won't be asked to sign forms. They'll be asked to sign the plans. They'll be asked to sign a form indicating that they've seen the plans. So, just for clarification, why is that change being made, and can people still sign the plans if they do support a development, if they are in favour of it?
Director of Development Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. Thanks for the question. So they're two separate mechanisms. You can still sign off on the plans, and that's taken as being consent under the planning framework. What this is trying to do is to create discussions and conversations between neighbours before lodgement of the application. So they are two distinct and separate processes, and the neighbours can do both.
Thanks, Manager Planning Services. Governance, you've probably seen Councillor Burns log on. Any other questions on C1? Councillor Hammersley.
Yep, thank you. There's just a couple of things about the Form A that I was wondering actually might be better if I was to send these in, but it just struck me that the form doesn't really on its face say what it's doing, and I just wondered whether we could or should put in something that records what the person is doing by signing it. So I had in mind those notes to the occupier, and then they just sign it. so they don't have to go off and look up planning policies and things like that, I was wondering if we could put in something like, I acknowledge that the above landowner has consulted with me about plans dated such and such and identified in some sort of way, and reserve my right to make submissions regarding the proposal during any public consultation period or any amended proposal. It's just that idea of the piece of paper sort of doing all the work on one piece of paper, and might be something that is best taken offline, or perhaps you want to tell me it should be an amendment. Thanks.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. Thanks for the question, Councillor Hammersley. I think with the attachment one, the Form A, it's not really a planning assessment, and I understand what you're saying, but there is still the city's obligation is to undertake the planning assessment, and if consultation is required, and the city still undertakes that, and that's further detail and information that we send out in our advertising letters to notify neighbours of what they're being asked. So this is really, we have included as part of the modified draft policy some additional notes to advise neighbours that they can contact us directly to understand why they're being asked to sign this. But if council wanted to make further modification to clarify, they could.
Any other questions? Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor. In clause 5 of the policy, it talks about after Form A is completed by the owner-occupier, it will be verified by the city, namely, I suppose that you'll check with the adjoining owners if they have, in fact, signed it or agreed. I presume, is that what that means?
Thank you, and through me, yes, that's what it means.
Part 2. So thank you for that. Then there's Form B, which that's where the owner-occupier says, I've sent the plans to the adjoining owners, but I haven't had any response. So how will that be verified, or because we're relying on the owner to say, or to get the signature, or to get the people, the adjoining owners, to sign the forms, the Form A. So how do you envisage that work without verifying that, because there's no mention of that? Thanks.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So the policy does contemplate the city reserving its right to vet any form that comes in. So I guess with the Form B, it does have a table in there that it's up to the applicant to demonstrate what actions they've taken. But we would check regardless, the same way we would check if the neighbours signed the plans as part of an application. We would check those details.
This is just it's not left field, but I should probably already know this, but I think that the fees that people pay when they lodge a development application are on a sliding scale depending on value. Is that correct? Then just say an average, like a $1 million house, valued house, what would the fee be approximately, and then we can work out the saving, which is 25% potentially if they consult with neighbours. Thanks.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. You're correct that the planning fees are set by the state government, or the maximum fees are set by the state government under the Planning and Development Regulations 2009. It is a sliding scale. I haven't calculated it for quite some time, but we can update the report with some examples to say if you had a house that was worth $500,000, what the fee would be, and if you engage with this initiative, what savings you'd get from that.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor, again. Yes, the point being, it was just to get an idea of, the 25%, because if it's not anything, I don't know that's going to encourage people. It's a good initiative, but the encouragement does seem to be the financial aspect, that's all.
Yeah, thanks, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So say if an application fee was $2,000 or $3,000, which is quite common for larger houses, 25% of that is quite significant, I guess, in these times.
Councillor Kosovich.
Mayor, and through you, again, in relation to this matter, the policy, the implementation, were council of a mind to approve this at the ordinary council meeting next Tuesday. Is there an implementation period, or can you take us through that again, please?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So if council was of the mind to support the officer recommendation, then basically the policy would become operational once its notice is provided in the local newspaper.
Councillor De Vries.
Sorry, through you, Mayor. I may have missed this question, but just should neighbours have the mind to ask questions on the pre-consultation concessions, they are welcome to call the city. I understand that, but as someone who might be looking at plans and not really know what questions to ask, will we have a kind of standard go-to questions that people might consider that we could have on the website, sort of to give some guidance for people who have concerns but don't necessarily have the knowledge of planning decisions or planning frameworks? Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen, and we certainly can look at doing that. I guess that the point of the policy is not for neighbours to speak to one another necessarily about the planning compliance or otherwise. It's about to start the conversation ahead of any formal notification taking place, because that often doesn't occur, and when it doesn't occur, it can result in some pretty bad outcomes.
Any final questions on C1? Councillor Kosovich.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. Just in terms of getting a line on, should the applicant be unable to contact the neighbouring property or the adjoining property owner, say they're away, the onus is on them to then post to an address, any address they can locate where the owner is likely to be, and they do that by registered post. Have I understood that correctly? And that's the only onus on them in terms of proof of service?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. Yes, essentially that's what would happen. But again, I guess we just need, the city is trying to encourage these conversations to occur. If advertising is required under the planning and development regulations, then we will do that regardless. So there will be occasions where the policy doesn't work in all occasions because people might be away, but that's why we've got the Form A and the Form B to cover off those scenarios.
Any final questions on C1? Okay, C2, a Development WA referral for the old PMH site. Any questions? Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. The report does discuss the city taking on management of the landscaping at some point, and what type of arrangements would the city be contemplating in terms of land tenure, and at what it sounds like that would be discussed or determined at the time when the handover is going to happen. So could someone just flesh that out a little bit? Thanks.
Director of Development Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So when it comes time for the handover of public assets, and in particular landscaping assets, it is envisaged that they would be through a management order, so a reserve like we have most of our other assets in the public realm, and the details of that can be included in a MOU between the city and Development WA that would consider the nature of the asset, any remediation that needs to occur through that, the types of materials used, and all those sorts of technical things. So that's essentially the mechanism that would allow for the asset to be provided to the city as in a management order.
And thank you for that answer, Director. Just supplementary to that, and through you, Mayor, what time period? I know normally in other developments it's like 2 years or something, and the developer manages it for 2 years, but would this be the case that handover won't happen until like possibly 10 years or something when the sites are developed, or what would be the time frame typically? Thanks.
I can do it. Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So I believe the question was, what time frame would these assets come to us? So it's likely that they once they're actually constructed and once they are managed for some time, there might be a period where, there's a defects period that Development WA might have on there. And following that, it would be up to Development WA and the city to enter into negotiations when that occurs. It's likely to occur once the subdivision and development works for those assets are created, not necessarily when the lots actually subdivided and developed upon. So it's when those public landscaping works are done, then there would have to be negotiations between the city and Dev WA.
Perhaps I can just add a little bit further. So not unusual to suppose the original Subi Redevelopment Authority. It occurs at a time when there's sort of a natural area that makes sense to have a conversation and negotiation about when that portion may well be handed over, and there's a whole bunch of other accounting stuff in that as well that needs to happen because they'll form part of our assets and they need to go on our schedule of maintenance, etc. So it's not unusual, but it is a negotiation, particularly also to ensure that the asset is handed over in good order in terms of the standards, etc.
Councillor De Vries.
Through you, Mayor. This is really by way of clarification, and because there's so much to read, I might have missed it. It's to do with the traffic flow option 1 and option 2. It's pretty complicated, and I, to be truthful, can't quite follow all the arrows. It's on, it's 7.2, hang on, it's on page 374 of the attachments, and I think it's 7.4 of the attachments. It's a lot in there. Let me tell you, this is the least exciting part, but that's the part that worries me the most, I suppose, is who's choosing option 1 or who's choosing option 2. I mean, I just don't, I know there are 2 options, which is fantastic, but I just would like to know how that decision is going to be made. And then there's the intersection operation and method of control, option 1 and option 2. Thank you.
Is that you, Alex? Yeah, Director of Development Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. That's actually not being considered as part of this development application. So it was considered by technical officers. Dev WA have their own traffic analysis and engineers, and they actually have been liaising with the city as the project goes on to ensure the volumes of traffic in and out, as they're modelled, are consistent with our modelling techniques. And also through that area, there are a number of approvals required through Main Roads Western Australia, as that those interchanges actually interact with Thomas Street and Graham Farmer Freeway. So it's done at a technical level. It's not actually part of this landscaping DA.
Just a follow-up question, if I may. Option 1 relates to a scenario where Roberts and Hay remain one-way streets, whereas option 2 relates to the conversion of those roads to two-way. They've been priorities for the City of Subiaco, and I understand the City of Perth for some time now. Do we know the state government's position on the conversion of those streets to two-way, and could that happen within a time frame that could accommodate the development of the PMH site?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. I believe that anything can happen with the appropriate funding and rigour behind it. From a technical point of view, we understand that officers from various state government authorities support the two-way proposal, and that's consistent with the City of Subi and the City of Perth. There are some challenges in the traffic modelling as the intersections connect with the Graham Farmer Freeway and the tunnel. So it's a bigger picture on how the traffic will flow, and the system needs to improve traffic flow, where two-waying would actually improve amenity and urban and the urban streetscape. So I'm not saying no and never, but it is a mammoth task given the development that's around. And the city continues to lobby for that in any avenue it's present in.
Councillor Powell.
Yes, sorry, and through you, Mayor, I've got a couple of questions. The first one is in regard to the advice notes. I think it's advice note 8. Sorry, excuse me. And it says in relation to condition 7, it's recommended that the footpaths along Thomas Street, Roberts Road and Hamilton Road should be brick paved or similar finish instead of plain concrete finish. I was wondering why that was desirable or why that was going to be imposed.
Directed at Technical Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So that option was recommended by staff as it's consistent with the other streetscape elements, particularly on the Hay Street side of the hospital, and to get that consistency around the precinct, and also just to get some further consistency with the overall planned hard infrastructure within the actual PMH site as well.
Sorry, so it'll look a little bit more upmarket than perhaps the standard concrete. Is that the... That was probably a comment rather than a question. Look, back to the old chestnut of the public open space. I noticed there's a comment that the proposed open space does not accommodate older children or teenagers. I'd like a little bit further explanation on that, and specifically there needs to be consultation with families that have lost teenagers, and that should be included as part of the detailed design process. Can you expand on that a little bit, please?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. Yeah, so that was a comment raised by one of the internal departments, and it's something for Development WA, I guess, to consider. I guess with open space provision and facilities within it, sometimes it doesn't always include, it's not always inclusive of all ages. So that's what that comment was directed towards. And I guess the other comment regarding the children, again, that was another comment that was raised by the place team for consideration of Development WA, I guess as part of telling the story of the facility more broadly and the history of the site.
Councillor White.
Yeah, thanks. I was going to ask the same question as Rick, but just to clarify, as I understand the report, and it's for me it's interesting just because of the weight given to it in the staff recommendation. The proposal is that the open space facilities should specifically go and recognise the issues for teenagers, which makes a lot of sense, I think, and the report talks particularly about teenage girls and the issues of inline seating and the ways in which that could be improved. But I do struggle a bit to understand, not with any resistance, but just to understand that there is going to be a process of understanding the memorialising of people, for parents who have lost children, and then we're making it in point 4G, we're making a very specific thing that should be done for parents who have lost teenagers, and I'm just not sure why we're giving that particular weight. I'm not against it, I just would like to understand why.
Thank you. We're just rereading that section. We can expand that to include a broader range. So we'll take that feedback on board and expand it in an updated report next week.
Sorry, it wasn't actually feedback, it was more a question. Why is this being given particular attention in this way? That's what I don't understand.
Look, thank you, and through you, Matt, I don't have the answer, so I'll take that on notice and we can provide you some more information next week.
I think I saw a hand on this side. Councillor Hammersley.
Yeah, I'm just picking up again on that theme about us taking over the management. I'm just wondering why we need to even say anything about that in this process, because I presume it's not really binding. We don't want to, I mean, wouldn't we be best just to let them build what they want to build, and then when they're ready to come and say to us, we want you to take it over? I don't know.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. What is quite important is that the city's technical officers primarily work with the people who are creating the assets. What we don't want is for the assets to be created in a state that they're very expensive or difficult for the city to maintain into the future. So the reason why we do have that connection and working closely with DevWA, especially in that technical maintenance aspect, is that to ensure that any materials or assets created that would eventually come to the city is not burdensome and difficult to replace. And that's been some learning that we've had from the Subiaco redevelopment area in the past.
Councillor De Vries.
Sorry, through you, Mayor. It may well be part of the development to have some recognition of the hundreds, thousands of nurses and doctors who've been part of the whole history of Princess Margaret Hospital. Is there any memorial? Did I miss that? Because obviously, for me, having had a child had her life saved at that hospital, it does mean something, I'm sure, to countless people, but I may have missed it, so just a query.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. I think in the south eastern corner, in the the old outpatients building, there's some matters relating to that.
Councillor Hammersley, I think I might have cut you off earlier. Councillor Stroud.
Is there a social housing component or percentage of this development?
Just for clarification, this is for the public realm and landscaping work, so this is not for private property. I guess, yeah, in the future, for developments, they will need to meet the development WA requirements for those as they apply.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. The reason I prompted is because you do raise in G1 no accommodation has been made for teenagers. So that sort of prompted my thoughts there, because you had actually stepped over into the building. So that's where I'm interested, because if they do have a social housing component, they could easily have a accommodation hostel type component for teenagers. So yeah, you've crossed over there, and I just wondered, maybe it's for another day, but that's why. Thank you, through you.
Sorry.
To clarify.
Yeah, I think he might have been using accommodation, the verb, rather than accommodation, a place where people stay. But, Manager, is that correct?
That's correct.
Does that answer the question, Councillor Stroud? It's not talking about accommodation where people live or stay. It's accommodation of ideas.
It's a poor word to use, perhaps.
Any other questions? Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. Where Godfrey House is, I don't know what page the plan is on for the one of the pages, the landscaping, so I can't refer you to that. But where Godfrey House is I think it might be lot 6 or something, but there's a white area around Godfrey House. Is that going to be all built? And I should have understood this from before with the design guidelines, but I don't think I did. So is there no sort of landscaping around Godfrey House? It's sort of incorporated into a building. Anyway, on the plan it's white. And what does that mean then? Thanks.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor McMullen. So I guess the white just delineates, I guess, the development sites, and then the grey, in this case for Godfrey House, that's the heritage listed building. I think on one of the plans it does show like a horseshoe type element to it, which I understand will probably be parking and landscaping around that. But as that's private, that will be private property, that's not part of this DA.
Councillor Powell.
Yes, look, through you, Mayor, and on a completely different bent. This is about the artwork and the chimney stack. Now, first off, does that come under the landscaping plan? And secondly, as noted by the city's public arts officer, any proposed artwork will be subject to a separate review and approval. Now, who would be doing that separate review and approval? Would it be coming to us?
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So that's a separate process, and the city's officers have been involved in a public art reference group, which is being run by Development WA. So that would need a separate approval process, not included in the landscaping.
Councillor Powell.
Yes, but would it be coming to us, to the council to decide?
Thank you. All development applications will need to be decided by Development WA. So it won't be the city deciding. The city can be included in comment, but it will be approved by Development WA, much like all the DAs in and around this area.
Any final questions on C2? Let's move on to C3, Heritage Grant applications. Any questions? C4, the award of tender for the Subiaco public Christmas decorations. No questions? C5, the major land transaction involving 2 Upham Street, Subiaco. Councillor De Vries.
Through you, Mayor, it's come to my attention that this piece of land may have been part of the original commonage, Subiaco commonage. I just wonder if staff knew or aware of that, or whether that's just not true. Thank you.
Director Corporate Services.
Through you, Mayor, thank you. I'm not aware of the term commonage, so I might have to look into that one. The common, yeah, it's part of an older term. It is part of the endowment lands, of that area. So it's mentioned in the Reserve Act as being part of those endowment lands, which I think are associated with what you're referring to. But I'd have to confirm exactly what that term refers to and whether this land forms part of it.
Through you, Mayor, this is quite a different question. Just in terms of the give statewide public notice, can I just understand how that's given? Because I just have no experience in what that looks like and how people know that it's not a community consultation, I presume, is it?
Through you, Mayor, no, it's not an interactive consultation, it's a notice. So notice would be, no, I'll just confirm how the notice would be provided. Yep, so through you, Mayor, I can confirm how exactly the statewide public notice was published. That's included in the agenda as well. So it's published on the City of Subiaco's website in the public notices section in the West Australian newspaper, and so that was published on the 24th of March. Also on the public notice board at the City's Administration Centre at 19 Bishop Street, and at the library, and in the City's e-newsletter as well.
And probably just if I can clarify, that's guided by the Local Government Act, and within that it will determine whether there is required for statewide, which means you've got to put in the West, or local public notice. So there are 2 types of notice that are required to notify as many people as possible, but it's not like a have your say type of, it's that sort of element that's required under the Local Government Act.
Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you. Just to put this on the public record, Councillor Stroud had asked, I thought, some good questions in the past about the green link that is in front of, I think it's in the front part of the site, and I was actually going to ask Councillor Stroud if she'd ask those questions again publicly, but because I can't remember all the things that she asked. But and also, yeah, I'd like to kind of re-understand that myself. So, can you? Would you be prepared to that, Councillor Stroud? Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Councillor Jennings. I didn't have a chance to return your call. Yeah, I can. There is a some sort of agreement of a green link, but also there was an issue with Cedar Woods and the development there, and from memories it had to do with sort of public access too. So I don't know if it's all relevant and whether it all came under some local development plan, but there's no reference to a local development plan of this site. So thank you, through you, Mayor. I've just thrown up a whole lot of little chestnuts there that perhaps staff can explain to us.
Director of Development Services.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So some time ago, the city progressed Amendment 37 to previous Town Planning Scheme 4. That then morphed into Local Planning Scheme number 5. What that did was reserve a portion of the Two Upham site, a 10-metre portion, as public open space. And the intent of that is to realise the city's vision of a east to west linkage, and that would connect the Subiaco Common. So that equated to roughly 10% of the land area of 2 Upham Street. So that would form part of that land's public open space contribution. It's currently reserved under our scheme, and it can be excised and provided. It can be excised before or even after sale to be included as a reserve or the city's asset. So that's already been factored into the development site to extend the east-west link.
CEO.
So yeah, just to round it out, so if you ever have come down to Subi Common and walk through there, that then continues that link as described by the director, and there were further plans obviously to be able to sort of hopefully push through at one stage, which would then connect it through to the Mabel Table Reserve and obviously the oval within the town of Cambridge. So that's sort of the broader vision of connecting that green connection right through from Subi Commons. So,
Councillor Stroud.
There's already a considerable garden between the pedestrian pathway and native garden, from the pedestrian pathway to the fence. I don't know if that's an old fence. Where does the land for sale start from that fence? And are we expecting another 10 metres in, because that seems to be a bit unrealistic, given the wide native garden that's already planted there? Thank you.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So the 10 metres is pretty much exactly that native garden. So the reservation is to protect that. It all fit nicely with the numbers, but its purpose is to protect that vegetation.
Councillor Jennings.
Thank you, Mayor, and through you, thanks for asking those questions, Councillor Stroud. So we've got a policy that says that should be reserved. So it's a policy. So the decision maker for that site ultimately, because it'll be some kind of medium or high-rise development, one imagines, unless they subdivide it up into smaller residential lots. So DAP will be the deciding authority. So if it's just a policy, how does that ensure that you'd hope DAP would take notice of it, but the first thing is, how do we ensure that actually happens? Because if it's discretionary, it may not. And secondly, is that 10-metre part close to the road, that's actually part of the freehold lot? Or is that part of the road reserve? Thank you.
CEO and Director of Development Services are jostling over this question. CEO, why don't you go first, and then we'll see if you've got it right or not.
I was going to suggest, look, there's a couple of things. One, there's planning, and the other thing, there's a contractual issue. So we're selling the land in the first instance, so we can deal with that matter on sale to ensure that there's no misunderstandings. That's the first point. And then Director may wish to talk to the planning aspects of it.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. So it's not a policy, it's in our scheme. So it's actually reserved land in our scheme, it's not zoned. So the development couldn't be approved on there through a DAP unless it goes through a rezoning process. But given the Minister has supported this and approved it, it's unlikely.
Councillor Jennings.
Thank you for that answer. Sorry, I misunderstood. I thought you said that 37 had changed to planning policy 5 or something, and that's where it was. But sorry, I've misunderstood. And then thank you, CEO, for that explanation too. If it's contractual, do we need to be doing something now, you know, to give direction to that? Because once we approve this, it's like off and running. No? With you, I mean.
CEO.
No, firstly, we're not off and running, and there's quite a few steps for council well before that. And as described in the report, the next steps are about getting some advice in relation to what is the best mechanism. So, and ultimately that'll be council's determination to decide whether or not, if they wish to go through that private treaty. Once again, it's got to come back here to be advertised, seek public feedback, etc. So auction likewise, or so the documentation would articulate that very clear, because obviously we want to describe and not rely on someone to understand what's in the town planning scheme, but understand what the actual is for sale and what is developable. And I suppose ultimately we'd also be looking for something, well, ultimately it's up to council, but something to sort of complement as well some of the works that have gone on to the north of that as well.
Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Mayor McMullen. Just with regards to the next steps, which I think is page 36, this goes to procurement, which is a matter that we've been discussing lately. It seems that we seem to be moving in some direction with regards to that, and it opens up some questions for me with regards to the city will run a competitive procurement process to appoint a suitably qualified, experienced agent. The city will request a methodology. Well, you know, I don't know, I see 0.2 is irrelevant. You know, I mean, private treaty in these economic times is the only consideration as far as I'm concerned, but that's personal opinion, just from my professional experience. And then there's some other matters, you know, I mean, the city's lawyers will, etc. Well, it goes to the same thing, you know, I mean, the same questions. Which lawyers? Can I have some answers with regard to that, or aren't there any? Or are we still in the same old boat that the staff will decide which lawyers they're going to pick, etc., or there have been comments from Councillor Hammersley that haven't been, I was about to say fulfilled, it's the wrong word, but you know, I mean, looking at a pool of different lawyers, etc. But I suppose what I'm really saying is spreading things out, still finding the best of the best, obviously, as we can. But I don't know, it just seems, I know it's still got to come back to council, but it's still, by the time it gets back to council, it's solely under the staff's auspice. So can I have any comments with regard to how we are in that space?
Director Corporate Services.
Through you, Mayor. So just to clarify, the question is around the officer's role in procuring things like sales agents and lawyers as opposed to the councils. Is that that kind of summates your question?
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess that the value of the services being procured would be within the officer's delegation, and that they would seek best value as they would in procuring any service on behalf of the city.
Yeah, but look, it's all very well for people to put things up, but you've got to, real estate's horses for courses. So if you look at this particular property, right, it's, our tendering process, which is all basically numerics. So many points for experience, so many points for track record, or all this sort of stuff, right? Well, we're selling, a big chunk of land, and there's certain agents that suit this. It's more a decision-making process, and I know we have legal obligations, but just putting it out there, and arguably it should be, something like this will be one of the big five. Okay, that doesn't mean anybody can put their name forward. I just see it a little bit more. It needs a little bit more finesse than our normal deal, and especially probably not so much towards the agents, but towards, again, the city will instruct its lawyers. Who are the city's lawyers? It's just that, that's all it says. Next step, its lawyers. Well, who are our lawyers?
Okay, Councillor Burns, there's a few comments there which I'll take as comments, but maybe we can just summarise it as being a question. Who are the city's lawyers? I think we all know the answer to that, but there's a panel of lawyers we draw from, and they're the lawyers on the Walga Legal Services panel, but I'll ask the Director of Corporate Services to confirm my understanding of who are the city's lawyers.
Through you, Mayor, I'll ask the Manager of Commercial to confirm exactly who the lawyers are on this one. I'm not sure if they have been appointed yet, but we do, lawyers are something that we procure in line with, the way that we procure goods and services is always, in order to gain best value, and that includes a degree of finesse, as you would describe it, to make sure that we certainly do get the best service and the best value for money that we can. So I may defer to the Manager.
Thank you for the question. Through the Chair, I wholeheartedly agree, Councillor Burns, that a bit of thinking needs to go into the procurement. And, I can speak directly to the lawyers, but also to the leasing agent. And the point you made is correct, that really you need to recruit a consultant.
The sales agent, not the leasing agent. You just said leasing agent.
Sorry, the sales agent. We have a procurement process that we go through, and as part of that we would look at things like relevant experience. So to your point about procuring a sales agent, who has experience with larger transactions, that would be something that we'd assess as part of that process under delegation. And similarly with lawyers, we wouldn't go to the market and ask a personal injury lawyer to provide a quote for this particular transaction. We would focus on property lawyers, and we would obtain quotes and submissions as per our procurement policy. That would go through an evaluation process, and a selection would be made based on qualitative criteria and then a value for money assessment. So, that process isn't unusual. That process is adopted by different levels of government, all over the country. And, there's some rigour around that to make sure that a value for money outcome is achieved.
And perhaps I could just jump in to round out the whole organisation. In procuring each different service, because we operate in quite different disciplines. So, for example, there's human resources, there's accounting, there's all those others in terms of planning. The lawyers or professionals that you use across the board within the city are quite diverse, probably more so than you'd probably imagine because of the type of work that we do. So in that evaluation, as Joel's described, he will be looking for those types of qualities, which means usually when we recruit either lawyers or professionals in that space, they're quite different to who we recruit for other or town planning or other type matters. and they predominantly can be from the Wauga panel, but we also procure off. So it's open as well for others that are not on that panel to make a submission, and we'd consider the merits and do the reference checking, etc. So we actually do use quite a broad cross section of advisors across the city, depending upon their skill set.
I agree with all that, but it goes back to my question, and you actually, I suppose you've defined it a little bit. Okay, so I'll summarise it more. Who are our property lawyers in this particular case? So let's forget lawyers doing other things, but what are the names of the lawyers that do property matters?
Manager Commercial Services and Property. I took your earlier answer to mean that we haven't appointed lawyers on this particular matter. Can you confirm if we've appointed lawyers yet or not?
Through the chair, that's correct. So we haven't appointed lawyers for this matter. To add some further colour to it, historically, we've used property lawyers, including Jackson McDonald, Cott Gunning, Gramercy Legal, Cause Chambers, and others. For building and construction, we've used Hodgkin Hanley. I know that for HR, we've used Minters. So just going back to Colin's, the CEO's point, it really depends on the subject matter of the work and really targeting the procurement to specialists in that area. But yes, confirming that the lawyers for this particular transaction haven't been appointed and will be the subject of a procurement process.
Does that answer the question, Councillor Burns?
Yeah, well, that's all you had to do was name the lawyers. So, sorry, it took a long time to get there. That's all I was asking, was for that list that Joel just provided. So, thank you.
Okay. Any other questions? Councillor Hammersley.
This is actually sort of questions will apply to both this item and the next one. And CEO mentioned, there's a contractual space that councils will be working in to dispose of this land, and then there's the planning issues. And one of the things that I wonder is whether Subiaco has ever explored the opportunities to deliver value to its ratepayers through the use of covenants on sales agreements to either ensure we get the best. I mean, it's a tricky balance, because if you put restrictions, people may not want to pay so much for the land because they might want to have a crack later on at getting more than planning framework allows. So I'm just wondering though, what's come to mind is, when the West Farmers site came up for planning, and we had quite a lot of heat in the community about Subiaco having sold that and having no real control over what happened next. And so I took from that, and I wasn't there when all that happened, so I don't know, but I just took from that we don't have expertise in controlling what happens to land we sell in the planning process through covenants. And you see that out in the boondocks out there. I shouldn't call them the boondocks, but out in the outer suburbs, restrictive covenants on titles. You can't build anything that the promoter doesn't want you to build in terms of what colour it is, what materials it is, how big it is, how many flower boxes there are, etc., etc. So be interested to know if it is something we have expertise, and if it isn't, whether we ought to think about getting some.
Director of Development Services. Okay, CEO.
I just thought it best that I would take this one. Look, part of the conversation that we're having with the information that will be through the engaging sales advice, etc., will be around the particular aspect and what's more favourable in terms of price versus value. And so there are many instruments that you can use, including actually the contract of sale, to articulate all covenants. There's a whole range of them, and it's not unusual for local government to determine or try and articulate in a sale what the preferred outcome is, and construct that within the contract of sale. That's not unusual. So it depends the extent, but obviously we'd get the feedback in relation to price received, etc., for that type of control. The other aspect that's quite common is around the timing of that delivery of that outcome, and to ensure that there's no, I suppose, just land banking of property. So all of those would be part of the conversation we'd have with elected members through once those I suppose professionals, both legal and sales, are involved, and then elected members would get a good sense, and that goes to forming part of the method by which you would wish to sell the property. So, by way of a tender, you can have a little bit more control. An auction, usually less, although you can say this is what the contract will look like. And then obviously if you want to be very specific, you may wish to go down the private treaty to go through some sort of negotiation process to determine the final outcome. So it's sort of a range within that, and each of the methods have their pros and cons, and also impact on possible price depending on the market. But it is not unusual for local government to do that.
Any final questions on C5? Okay, let's move on to C6, another major land transaction involving multiple lots. This one's a step behind the other one because we're considering whether to put it out for statewide public notice. Any questions on C6? Councillor White.
Thank you. It might be that I'm not quite understanding where we are in the process, but I have to, my questions are based on a concern, which I realise I can't comment too much on, but about a lack of detail. The first point is, for me, on page 39 of the report, we're told that in June 2017, the SCC, the Subiaco Community Centre, fell into disuse. But now, and then two paragraphs below, we're told that it is used by a limited number of user groups. Is it in disuse or is it being used? And is disuse?
Sorry, I thought you were done. Director Corporate Services.
Through you, Mayor, it's currently in a state of disuse. So my understanding is, and I'll just confirm with the manager, that those user groups are currently there's no user groups currently using the facility. That's correct.
Thank you. I guess my concern is we've got this asset as a community, we've let it run down, and now we're saying sell it. The information that I'm worried about is that I feel like I'd like is what is the community demand? We're told that there's many other community centres within walking distance, etc., etc. But I believe we should be given information about what is the strategy for facilities, what is the demand for facilities and these things before we start putting one up for sale. I guess, again, unless I'm misunderstanding something here, I think that, so question, can we be given more information about the demand for community centre facilities and maybe some information about the demise of the user numbers in this facility before we're being asked to sell it? Sorry.
Thank you. Perhaps I could jump in first and then others. Yes, we can, and I think we've done some of that user analysis in terms of community facilities when we've been looking at other particular issues. My understanding this goes back some time ago, and Council of the day had looked at this as, given also that it was on freehold land, that the intended purpose was not to refurbish and then lease out, but rather to sell. And now I'm not sure if there's resolutions to that effect, but then the properties behind as well, they had been leased out for some time, and the reason why this is probably coming now sooner rather than probably what we anticipated is they've indicated they wish to vacate. So that's why these have come now. But in terms of usage, we can provide the usage related to the two closest community centres. But for some time, the city has used this for sort of alternate type purposes to store museum and other items, etc., on the basis that at some point in time this would be sold. But I can hand it over to anybody else that wishes to pick it up. Oh, okay.
Thank you. And just to add to that, a couple of years ago, Council endorsed a social infrastructure report. So in that report for the Subiaco Community Centre, it says that the lead is the city to investigate opportunities to sell, rationalise, consolidate or repurpose for hire and best use as an alternative council asset. So council has considered this and a wide range of community centres in the infrastructure report, which we can provide.
Through the chair, I'm glad the director raised the social infrastructure report, because part of the question was to the strategy of our buildings, and I think the social infrastructure report, it does talk about demand, usage and utilisation and optimising our assets. The other strategic document we have is our long-term capital works program, which talks to strategy and asset optimisation. And we're also picking up on some of those themes through the work that we're doing with the civic precinct and this particular building. So hopefully, Councillor White, that sort of points you in the right direction. But as the CEO mentioned, we can certainly get you some data on user groups and usage. I think one of the complexities with the Subiaco Community Centre is that it was used when we provided HAC services some time ago, health and aged care services, and after the city ceased providing those services, that's when the demand for that particular centre really dropped. We do have capacity at our other community centres, but part of the difficulty is knowing whether the capacity is due to a lack of demand or whether it's simply a function that the community centres or some of them are quite unpleasant places to be. They're generally at end of life. They need to be renewed, and so the fact that we've got capacity there might be a function of people not needing them, or it might be a function of people not wanting to use them because they're quite unpleasant. So that's just some food for thought as well.
So just to confirm, you're going to supply some usage data between briefing and the meeting, I suppose. Councillor White, did you want to keep going?
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, if there was an updated appendix which included any resolutions that were done on this topic earlier, that would be great. And of course, the social infrastructure report also seems to me could be quite valuable as an appendix or a link to it. So, I suppose the challenge for me is we in the report. We talk about the city precinct in the appendix and say that we need to plan and prepare for the future. It's vital that the strategy for the civic regard, think about population growth. We're thinking about that for the precinct, but not so much for an existing community centre. That's the sort of trade-off for me. Just the last question is, like most staff recommendations, we're given options, and there are 3 options here. It's a bit hard to really weigh up these options in this case. One is to retain, the other one is to develop, the other one is to sell. In a sense, to me, there's a cost-benefit equation to each of these options, and I'm sure it's not going to be possible to come with a cost-benefit analysis for all 3. But it does feel, I feel like we're lacking information to make this kind of decision. We have a week before we debate it. And I'd be very keen on any information about cost benefits in relation to this, because this is a real concern to me in terms of the way in which not the way, but more the fact that there is pretty limited information provided to us in the report and in the annexes. So the question is,
Sorry, I keep thinking you've finished your questions, but there's always an end bit.
Yeah, so do I. But the point simply being, I guess, ensure that I'm making a question. The question is, would it be possible to provide any further information for next week around the cost benefit of this kind of decision being put to us?
Director Corporate Services.
Thank you, through you, Mayor. Yes, I think that would be possible.
CEO is going to supplement that answer.
The other thing that I'd probably supplement is and it's probably contained in other reports, is over the years as well, most local governments have focused on the land tenure as an issue as well, and mainly focused community assets on either reserve or vested land. And I suppose so that's probably why this goes back some time in terms of it being freehold land. So that's part of the consideration as well in terms of reducing the assets that you've got, being able to have funds to be able to improve the other community assets you have and appropriately place them on management or vested land. So that's sort of the history to much of these in Subiaco as well as probably most local governments.
Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Mayor McMullen. Just to my questions is just seeking reassurance that the building substantially is not being used. I do know we used it the other day for upgrading to Office 365, for an afternoon or a day or something. But otherwise, first part of my question is, could the staff confirm that, again, the building is substantially unused, and if so, for how long has it been substantially unused?
Mr. Guest.
Through the chair, yes, I confirm the building's currently not used by any user groups. Staff do use it occasionally on an ad hoc basis for some storage and things like that, but that type of usage could easily be relocated elsewhere. So we did have 3 regular user groups a few months ago: the Wildflower Society, Women's Boxing and a church group, and they were really the only 3 regular hirers of the building. When we had the fire at this building, we had to set up the SCC as a satellite office for staff. And so that was an opportunity to relocate those 3 regular hires to other buildings.
I'm not going to cut you off, but that's fine. I was talking about just, being used by the, for its original purpose, for community use, using it for other bits and pieces. I'm not being rude, but just so we can move on, I'm not concerned about that we've used it, in relation to fires, etc. So I thank you for your answer, and I take it for what it is. So I'll move on if you don't mind, and I do apologise if you think I'm coming across your way. So the next part of my question would be this. There's been a lot of talk about building new headquarters, and those headquarters including community uses. So, and this building has been mentioned in that. So, am I allowed to be thinking that I can subtract this particular building because it's not used, okay? When we talk about when the staff talks about need for space for community things, well, obviously this isn't space we need because we don't use it, right? Whether it's old or whatever, we're not squeezed elsewhere. So is that an incorrect thought?
There's no incorrect thoughts, Councillor Burns, but CEO, did you want to comment on the correctness or otherwise of the thought?
I think I understand the question to be, would the sale of this property ordinarily then put pressure on community facilities to be incorporated at 241 Rockby Road? And if that's the question, I'd say the answer to that is no, because at the moment there is no one there. The question, I suppose, that Councillor White asking is to what extent are the other 2 in close proximity To what extent do they have capacity to allow other users to use those community facilities if they wanted to use those, and that's a different question.
Yeah, that's fine. The question's asked and answered. I'm happy, thank you.
Councillor Hammersley.
Yeah, thank you. As I understand it, this step of, because we're on C6, is to advertise, and it's a statutory process that you have to go through if you were going to sell something. And I think I can feel some unease because it might just be the wording, but is there a specific wording we have to use, or could we say the CEO be authorised to give statewide public notice that the city may undertake the major land transaction? Do we have to say we are going to sell? Because I think some of the disquiet is about feeling like they're making a decision to sell, which we're actually not. And when you understand the next steps and the fact it's going to come back to council, when push comes to shove and someone has to make a decision as to whether this is the right time at the right price, it's going to be somewhere down the track. So maybe the CEO could help us with that.
Through the chair, the key word in if I require in 359 relates to before, and so this is the before bit, and so before you even entertain doing something, and what that's asking you to do is put an ad out. We can look at the wording and perhaps shape that if that's of assistance. The key thing to do though is probably, as I said, you can't even progress if council don't consider the submissions. So all this really is to say, is there going to be submissions where people might go, actually I wanted to use it for this purpose, etc., etc. So that's what this is about. But we could look at the particular word, although it's saying proposes to undertake. It doesn't necessarily mean that you will undertake. It's actually seeking feedback, and you cannot progress a business plan under the Local Government Act until such time as you consider that feedback. So.
I think Director Corporate Services has an answer.
Thank you, and through you, Mayor. I've got the Act in front of me, and basically in relation to major land transactions. So the local government is to give statewide public notice stating that the local government proposes to commence the major trading undertaking or enter into the major land transaction described in the notice. So it's a little bit prescribed in the Act as to the wording. I hope that the CEO's description, around the word proposed, it is only proposes or proposes to. It's not actually that we will do.
Councillor De Vries.
I'm sorry, through you, Mayor. This is to the Director for Corporate Services, I think. That so we go through the process and we advertise it as a major land transaction, and presumably we still get to make the choice afterwards whether it goes to sale. Or say we still don't feel we have adequate information to make a decision, and 6 months down the track we come back to that decision. Does it need to go back to to be advertised again? So does that process have a time frame? Sorry, I didn't got to the point now, sorry. Is there a time frame where it runs out and it has to be started all over again? Thank you.
Through you, Mayor, I'd probably have to take that one on notice unless the manager is aware of the answer to that question. No, we'll have to take that one on notice.
Councillor Burns.
Thank you, Member Mullen. But if it's all right with you, is it possible just to pose a question with regards to this particular item once we go behind closed doors?
It's confidential, commercially in confidence, or something to that effect, is it?
Yeah, it relates to it in confidence. I don't want to ask it. I'm not going to ask it publicly.
Yep.
So is there a problem? You just bring something up?
No, there's not a problem because the standing orders don't specifically apply to these briefing sessions. So we've got some other confidential business to discuss in a workshop setting afterwards. We can include your issues then.
Thanks very much. It's very brief. It's just something I don't think we should discuss publicly.
Good.
All right, thank you.
Any final questions on the C6? That brings us to the last of the public agenda items for this evening, financial statements and reports for the month ending 31 March 2023. Any questions? No? Okay. As foreshadowed, there will be some confidential items at next week's agenda and we'll vote to deal with those confidentially in the usual way, but for the purpose of tonight's briefing, that brings our business to an end. So I declare the City of Subiaco Agenda Briefing Forum of the 23rd of May 2023 closed at 6:46 p.m. Thanks everyone.